When the showcase experience begins, we want the user to see a menu on their desktop and to press Start before entering VR. In a future update, we want to extend this menu to allow the user to choose either desktop or VR experiences and set more options as needs grow, like collaboration, for example. We'll start by setting up our gameplay assets that we created in the previous video. Then we'll be adding some simple blueprints to the starter pawn to spawn a simple menu in the game starts for the end user to start the experience. We will be confronted with a few blueprint errors that came along with the Virtual Studio project, so we'll need to fix those. And lastly, we'll then create that simple UMG widget to interact with. Let's start by setting up those gameplay assets that we created earlier. Go to our nav VR folder, and then into our gameplay folder. Open the game mode so we can alter a few default values. Set the game state to our GM Studio Showcase, the player controller to our PC Studio Showcase, and the default pawn to be our BPC starter pawn. Also, while we're here, a setting that has saved me more than once from losing work is within this little flag next to compile. Change the value of save on compile to on success only. That way, as soon as it successfully compiles, the asset is saved. Open your project settings and select Maps and Modes. Set the game mode base to our GM Studio Showcase. Let's also make our default levels the trackerless studio maps and save the project. I want to test everything to be certain that the settings are working as expected. But as you can see, we are presented with a message warning us of a few errors that were brought over by the Virtual Studio project migration. But it's no problem. If you recall, we disabled the plugin to access the assets that we wanted to use inside of that project. The blueprints that are being shown here all have errors with references to that plugin, and as far as our project is concerned, that plugin doesn't exist. Let's go through these blueprints and simply delete the logic contained inside because we're not going to use any of it. Okay, now we can test our gameplay assets. Press play. You can search the world outliner for our BPC starter pawn, and there it is. So it is being spawned by our game mode as intended. Stop the game. I see that the pawn was spawned correctly, but it's looking a little bit to the right, and I want it to spawn looking straight ahead. So I'll select the player start and set its rotation in Z to 270. And if I press play again, it's looking straight. Let's now create the UMG widget we will use as our start screen. We'll make a new folder and name it UMG. Let's add another named start screen. Right-click and under User Interface, select Widget Blueprint. Name this W_start screen. This will be a very simple start screen with just one button. Inside of the Hierarchy tab, delete the Canvas panel because we just want the button to be placed in the direct middle of the screen, regardless of screen size and aspect ratio. A horizontal box will work much better. Let's also drag in a button from the palette. I'm going to center this button and set the size to fill. Finally, let's add some text to it. Rename the button to button_start game and set the text to read start game in VR. I'll also add some extra padding to give it some more visibility on the screen. And finally, change the color of the text to black so it's a bit more legible. In future videos, we're going to make our widgets much prettier. But for now, let's focus on getting things working. Before I close UMG, I want to add an event to the button when the user clicks it. A simple print screen will be fine. Try to be specific with your print strings. I'll make it print start button pressed. Compile and close. Now let's open our starter pawn and tell it to create that starting screen. Open full blueprint editor And on begin play, we want to immediately create a new widget of class W start screen and add it straight to the player screen. Remember to comment your code, regardless of simplicity. I like to color code my comments where black is generally something that is basically done and isn't waiting for anything, but I'm not too strict on that. Do what works best for you, but do comment. Compile this and close. Now when we press play, our widget is displaying correctly. If I click it, start button pressed is printed to the screen. Okay, so we set up our gameplay assets, including making our starter pawn the default pawn to be spawned. We cleaned up the errors brought in from Virtual Studio and created our starting screen with a working button. Next, I cover and build our primary means of communication, a blueprint interface.